The woman who shared 5 brothers as husbands rocks on her porch, counting deformed fingers while Marcus Washington's rental car crunches gravel below. Sheriff Briggs watches from shadows as Marcus approaches the Whitmore compound, knowing 3 generations of monstrous births hide behind these rotting walls. Will Marcus expose the genetic horror breeding in Kentucky's hollers, or join the conspiracy of silence? The woman who shared 5 brothers as husbands rocks on her porch, counting deformed fingers while Marcus Washington's rental car crunches gravel below. Sheriff Briggs watches from shadows as Marcus approaches the Whitmore compound, knowing 3 generations of monstrous births hide behind these rotting walls. Will Marcus expose the genetic horror breeding in Kentucky's hollers, or join the conspiracy of silence? Marcus Washington had driven 12 hours through winding mountain roads to reach this forgotten pocket of eastern Kentucky. The assignment seemed straightforward enough when his editor pitched it. Write a human interest piece about rare genetic disorders in isolated Appalachian communities. The medical journal wanted something accessible, something that would help urban readers understand the challenges facing rural America. Millbrook existed as little more than a wide spot in the road. Population 847, according to the faded sign, though Marcus suspected that number hadn't been updated in decades. The town consisted of a general store, a Baptist church, a combination post office and gas station, and maybe 30 houses scattered along the valley floor. Mountains rose on all sides like green walls, creating a natural bowl that seemed designed to keep secrets. The rental car's air conditioning struggled against the humid August heat as Marcus parked outside the Millbrook Medical Center. The facility barely qualified as a clinic, occupying a converted house with peeling white paint and a hand-lettered sign. Dr. Sarah Chen had agreed to meet him here, though her voice over the phone carried reluctance that Marcus hadn't understood until now. Inside, the waiting room held 6 mismatched chairs and a reception desk where a woman with steel gray hair regarded Marcus with open suspicion. She made no effort to announce his arrival, forcing him to clear his throat and explain his appointment. The woman's eyes narrowed when he mentioned the Whitmores. Dr. Chen emerged from a back room carrying a manila folder thick with papers. She was younger than Marcus expected, probably early 30s, with the tired expression of someone fighting a losing battle. Her handshake was firm but brief. They spoke in her cramped office, surrounded by filing cabinets that looked older than the building itself. Dr. Chen spread patient files across her desk with the careful precision of someone handling evidence. The photographs made Marcus's stomach tighten. Birth defects ranging from cleft palates to missing limbs to skull malformations that defied easy description. Every file bore the same surname, Whitmore. The pattern became clear as Dr. Chen explained what she discovered over 3 years of treating the family. Genetic disorders appeared at rates that violated every statistical model. Conditions that should occur once in a million births happened repeatedly within a single bloodline. The medical impossibility suggested either environmental contamination or something far worse. Marcus studied the dates on the medical files. Cases spanning nearly a century, yet the same names appeared again and again. How many Whitmores lived in this valley? The doctor's expression suggested she'd been asking herself the same question. Outside the clinic, Marcus noticed how conversation stopped when he passed. Townspeople turned away or found sudden interest in storefront windows. The woman at the general store quoted him double the marked price for a bottle of water until he mentioned he wasn't staying long. Only then did her demeanor soften slightly. The first real clue came from an unexpected source. While examining the selection of local history books in the general store, Marcus overheard 2 elderly men discussing someone's funeral. They spoke in the low, careful tones reserved for family scandals, but one phrase carried clearly across the narrow aisles. One woman, 5 rings. When Marcus approached, both men clammed up immediately. The taller one claimed he'd been talking about a jewelry store in the next county. His companion nodded agreement with the desperation of a bad liar. They left without purchasing anything, moving with the urgent shuffle of people escaping interrogation. The Historical Society occupied the basement of the Baptist church. Mrs. Dolers Pike, the volunteer curator, greeted Marcus with the enthusiasm of someone rarely visited. She brought out photo albums and record books with obvious pride, eager to share Millbrook's modest heritage. The Whitmore section was surprisingly sparse. Mrs. Pike explained that most of their records had been donated by families themselves, and the Whitmores had never been much for preserving history. Still, she found a few photographs from town celebrations and church gatherings. Marcus studied the images with growing confusion. The same woman appeared in multiple photographs spanning what looked like several decades. She stood beside different men in what were clearly wedding poses, yet her face remained virtually unchanged. The men all shared similar features. Brothers, perhaps, but the timeline didn't make sense. Mrs. Pike noticed his puzzlement and leaned closer to examine the photographs. Her cheerful demeanor faltered as she studied the images. She began gathering the albums with sudden urgency, claiming she'd made an error and needed to reorganize the collection. As Marcus prepared to leave, Mrs. Pike caught his arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong for such a small woman. She glanced around the empty basement before speaking in a whisper that barely qualified as sound. Some stones should stay unturned. Some families carry burdens that aren't meant for outsiders to understand. The Whitmores have their reasons for keeping to themselves. That evening, Marcus sat in his motel room reviewing his notes. The medical evidence was compelling but incomplete. The historical photographs raised more questions than they answered. The townspeople's behavior suggested a conspiracy of silence, protecting something far worse than simple mountain insularity. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown local number. The message contained only an address and a time: midnight. No signature, no explanation. Marcus stared at the screen until it went dark, then checked the locks on his door twice before trying to sleep. The address led Marcus to an abandoned farmhouse 3 miles outside town. His headlights cut through mountain darkness as he parked beside a rusted mailbox bearing no name. The front porch sagged under the weight of decades, but a single light burned in an upstairs window. Dr. Chen's car sat in the driveway. She met him at the door carrying a cardboard box and a flashlight. Her professional composure had cracked, replaced by the haunted expression of someone who'd seen too much. She led him inside without explanation, setting the box on a dust-covered kitchen table. The contents made Marcus's hands shake. Birth certificates dating back to 1923, all bearing the name Eliza Mee Whitmore as mother. The father's names changed with each document, but the surnames remained constant: Jeremiah Whitmore, Ezekiel Whitmore, Samuel Whitmore, Isaiah Whitmore, Zachariah Whitmore, 5 brothers, 5 fathers, 1 mother. Dr. Chen spread additional documents across the table. Marriage licenses confirmed the impossible timeline. Eliza Mee Whitmore had married Jeremiah in 1923. When he died in 1931, she married Ezekiel. Upon his death in 1938, she married Samuel. The pattern continued through all 5 brothers, ending with Zachariah's death in 1967. Each marriage had produced children. Each generation showed increasingly severe genetic abnormalities. The medical files Dr. Chen had smuggled from the clinic painted a picture of systematic biological disaster. Blood tests revealed DNA markers that should have been impossible. Children fathered by uncles who were also their stepfathers. Grandchildren born to parents who shared the same genetic material as siblings. Marcus studied photographs documenting the family's physical deterioration across generations. The first children born in the 1920s showed minor abnormalities: webbed fingers, slight facial asymmetries, conditions that could be hidden or explained away. By the 1940s, the deformities had become more pronounced: club feet, severe developmental delays, children who lived brief, painful lives before succumbing to organ failures their tiny bodies couldn't survive. The current generation represented the culmination of nearly a century of genetic collapse. Jacob Whitmore, whom Marcus had glimpsed at the general store, was among the healthiest survivors. Others remained hidden away in the family compound, their conditions too severe for public exposure. Dr. Chen had conducted DNA analysis on blood samples collected during routine medical visits. The results confirmed what the family records suggested. 5 generations of systematic inbreeding had created a genetic bottleneck so severe it defied medical literature. The children weren't just cousins. They were genetic siblings born to the same limited gene pool, passed down through a maternal line that had deliberately avoided outside blood. The most damning evidence came from Sheriff Tom Briggs's own files. Dr. Chen had discovered them in the county courthouse basement, misfiled among property records from the 1960s. Police reports documented multiple investigations into suspected child abuse at the Whitmore compound. Each investigation had been quietly closed without charges. The reports contained witness statements describing children with severe disabilities being hidden from social services and medical authorities. More disturbing were the financial records Dr. Chen had uncovered. Regular payments from an account controlled by the Whitmore estate to the Briggs Family Trust. The payments began in 1952 and continued monthly for over 40 years. Sheriff Briggs had inherited more than his badge from his father. He'd inherited a family business built on keeping the Whitmore secret buried. Marcus photographed every document while Dr. Chen explained how she discovered the truth. Her medical curiosity had been triggered by the impossible concentration of rare genetic disorders. What started as professional interest became horrified fascination as the scope of the family's situation became clear. The Whitmores hadn't simply been unlucky. They'd been deliberately cultivating genetic disaster for reasons that went beyond ignorance or isolation. The family possessed significant land holdings throughout the valley, property that had been kept within the bloodline through a system of serial marriages designed to prevent outside inheritance. Eliza Mee Whitmore hadn't been a victim of circumstance. She'd been the architect of a genetic nightmare, trading her reproductive capacity for economic security while condemning her children to lives of suffering and early death. The evidence trail led to a horrifying realization. The current generation wasn't the end of the Whitmore line. Dr. Chen had discovered recent birth certificates indicating the pattern was continuing. Young women within the family were already bearing children to their own relatives, perpetuating the cycle that had begun over a century ago. As dawn approached, Dr. Chen packed the documents back into their box. She'd spent months gathering this evidence, knowing that exposure would destroy whatever remained of the Whitmore family while potentially ending her own career. Medical ethics required her to report child abuse, but the complexity of the situation defied easy categorization. Marcus understood her dilemma. Publishing this story would bring national attention to a family that had suffered enough. Yet allowing the situation to continue meant condemning future generations to the same genetic hell that had claimed so many Whitmore children. The weight of the evidence made the choice inevitable. Too many children had died in silence. Too many others continued to suffer while authorities looked the other way. The conspiracy of silence that protected the Whitmores had enabled decades of preventable tragedy. Dr. Chen handed Marcus a final document, a birth certificate dated 3 weeks ago. The newest Whitmore baby had been born with multiple severe defects and wasn't expected to survive her first year. The father's name matched that of the child's grandfather. The cycle was continuing, and only exposure could break it. Marcus drove to the Whitmore compound as morning mist clung to the valley floor. The property stretched across 60 acres of bottomland, connected by dirt roads that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. 5 separate houses clustered around a central homestead, their sagging roofs and broken windows testament to generations of decline. Eliza Mee Whitmore sat on the front porch of the main house, exactly as she had 3 days earlier when Marcus first arrived in Millbrook. Up close, her age showed in ways that distance had hidden. Her hands, twisted by arthritis, gripped the arms of a wooden rocking chair worn smooth by decades of use. Her eyes held the clarity of someone who had carried secrets too long. She spoke without prompting when Marcus climbed the porch steps. Her voice carried the mountain accent that marked lifelong residents of these isolated valleys, but her words came with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in her mind countless times. The story she told matched the documents Dr. Chen had gathered, but with details that transformed statistics into human tragedy. Eliza Mee had been 14 when her family sold her to the Whitmore brothers in 1923. The arrangement wasn't unusual for the time or place. Poor families traded daughters for livestock, land, or simple debt forgiveness. What made the Whitmore situation different was their determination to keep their property within the bloodline. 5 brothers shared one wife to ensure that any children born would carry Whitmore blood. When death claimed a brother, the arrangement continued with the next in line. The system guaranteed that the family's substantial landholdings would never be diluted by outside inheritance. Eliza Mee had borne 37 children across 4 decades of serial marriages. 18 had died before their 5th birthday. 12 more succumbed to genetic complications before reaching adulthood. The survivors carried the physical and mental scars of systematic inbreeding, hidden away from a world that wouldn't understand their situation. She recounted these facts without self-pity or obvious emotion, as though describing someone else's life. The numbness in her voice suggested a woman who had exhausted her capacity for grief decades earlier. Her children had been born into suffering she couldn't prevent, raised in isolation she couldn't escape, condemned to repeat patterns she couldn't break. Marcus listened without interruption as Eliza Mee described the family's decline. Each generation had produced fewer healthy children. The most recent births showed such severe abnormalities that survival beyond infancy was rare. The genetic pool had become so restricted that conception itself was becoming increasingly difficult. While Eliza Mee spoke, Sheriff Briggs arrived with 2 deputies. He approached the porch with the confident stride of someone exercising familiar authority, but his expression betrayed uncertainty when he saw Marcus's recording equipment. The sheriff had built his career on controlling information flow in Millbrook. The presence of an outsider with evidence threatened the careful balance he'd maintained for decades. Briggs ordered Marcus to stop recording and leave the property immediately. When Marcus refused, citing his rights as a journalist, the sheriff's composure cracked. He threatened arrest on charges of trespassing and disturbing the peace. His voice carried the desperation of someone watching a lifetime of carefully constructed lies collapse. Dr. Chen's arrival changed the dynamic completely. She brought printed copies of all the evidence they'd gathered, along with a representative from the state attorney general's office who had driven down from Frankfurt that morning. The investigation Marcus had triggered was already moving beyond local control. The state investigator took statements from Eliza Mee, while social workers evaluated the current children living on the property. Medical examinations confirmed Dr. Chen's findings and revealed additional cases of severe genetic abnormalities that had been hidden from outside authorities for years. Sheriff Briggs attempted to destroy evidence from his office files, but Marcus had already provided copies to state authorities. The financial records documenting decades of payments from the Whitmore estate sealed his fate. He was arrested on charges of obstruction of justice and conspiracy to conceal child abuse. The surviving Whitmore children were removed to specialized care facilities equipped to handle their complex medical needs. For the first time in their lives, they received proper nutrition, medical treatment, and educational opportunities adapted to their capabilities. Several showed remarkable improvement once removed from the compound's neglect and isolation. Eliza Mee Whitmore died peacefully 3 weeks after giving her statement to authorities. The county medical examiner attributed her death to natural causes, but those who knew her understood that she had simply chosen to let go once her secrets were finally revealed. She was buried in the family cemetery behind the compound, joining the 5 husbands who had shaped her extraordinary and tragic life. Marcus published his investigation in a series of articles that prompted national discussion about genetic counseling and social services in isolated communities. The story won several journalism awards, but the recognition felt hollow given the human cost the investigation had revealed. Dr. Chen used the attention to establish a genetic counseling program for Appalachian communities, funded by federal grants and private donations. Her work helped identify other families at risk for similar genetic complications, providing education and resources to prevent future tragedies. The Whitmore compound was eventually abandoned, its buildings left to decay among overgrown fields. Local teenagers told ghost stories about the property, but most adults preferred to avoid discussing the family that had lived there. The silence that had protected the Whitmores for generations gradually transformed into the collective amnesia that small communities used to forget uncomfortable truths. Marcus returned to Millbrook 1 year later to research a follow-up article. The town looked unchanged, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly. People made eye contact now. Conversations didn't stop when strangers approached. The weight of the Whitmore secret had lifted, allowing the community to breathe freely for the first time in living memory.